Today on Straight Talk Africa, the upcoming presidential and general elections in Kenya. To what extent is the political playing field leveled in order to hold a free, fair, and credible poll in the East African nation? That's coming up next right here on Straight Talk Africa. Hello, welcome to Straight Talk Africa, live from the Voice of America studios here in Washington. I am Shaka Sali.
And hello to all our viewers and listeners on the continent and elsewhere. I'm Ayan Bior, your social media reporter.
Today, it's a discussion on whether the Kenyan political playing field is leveled in order to hold a credible election.
And coming up later, our audience has weighed in on our topic through emails, Facebook, and Twitter comments. And we'll reveal some of them ahead on Straight Talk Africa.
In less than 2 months, Kenyans will hold presidential and general elections. But as my colleague Heidi Adams-Fitzpatrick reports, its elections have not always run smoothly. Here is what's at stake.
When Kenyans go to the polls on August 8th, it will be as much about the country's past as the future, a test for democracy and political stability in one of Africa's most developed countries. If Kenyans are on edge, it's with good reason. These images are burned into the national psyche. The disputed outcome of the 2007 election triggered 2 months of conflict that quickly spiraled into ethnic violence. More than 1,200 people were killed and roughly 500,000 fled their homes. It was the worst bloodshed the country had seen since independence in 1963. The 2013 elections were largely peaceful, but failing electronic tallying equipment stoked voter concerns of fraud and prompted the opposition to take its complaints to the Supreme Court. Several people died in protests. This year's presidential race is a rematch between familiar opponents. Incumbent President Uhuru Kenyatta rose to power in 2013 as Kenya's youngest head of state. The wealthy son of Kenya's first president is seeking a second term in office. His ruling Jubilee Party is new. It was formed last year in a merger of 12 political parties that support the president. Kenyatta faces Raila Odinga. The veteran politician and former Prime Minister Kenyatta beat in 2013. Odinga has run for president 3 times before and comes from one of Kenya's most powerful political families. He leads the National Super Alliance, an umbrella for all parties opposed to Kenyatta. The president is touting economic growth as he lays out his case for re-election, saying his government has funded the most aggressive development drive in the country's history. He's playing down problems that have plagued his administration: deadly terror attacks, strikes by teachers, nurses and doctors, failing banks, and a string of corruption scandals that have drained government coffers of tens of millions of dollars. The opposition has turned these failings into a rallying call. Security and rampant corruption are likely to take center stage, alongside the government's handling of a severe drought that has driven up food prices and fueled inflation. The shortage of maize, a staple food for most Kenyans, also known as unga, has spawned the election hashtag Unga Revolution. Kenyans have increasingly turned to social media to debate election issues amid concerns of political bias in the mainstream media. There is something new this cycle: the political map. In 2013, Kenya began devolving power to its 47 counties to manage local infrastructure. This approach has heightened tensions. Parts of Kenya saw small-scale violence and protests during chaotic primaries earlier this year. Dozens of primary races had to be suspended and rerun. It's a political tightrope that has given international observers a glimpse of potential fault lines in the upcoming polls. Elections are by their very nature divisive, and Kenyans have a history of voting largely along ethnic lines. The International Monetary Fund is warning that political instability could slow growth in Kenya's $69 billion economy, putting progress at risk in one of Africa's most volatile regions. Heidi Adams-Fitzpatrick, VOA News, Washington.
Thanks, Heidi, for that interesting report. And for more insight regarding the preparations of the upcoming poll, We are joined on the phone by David Ohito, digital editor of the Standard Media Group from the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Good evening, David.
Good evening, Shaka.
How are you?
I am pretty fine.
Now talk to us from your vantage point. What is the political temperature on the ground like?
Thank you, Shaka. That's a very good question, but let me just clarify. I have since quit my job as digital editor. I'm a consulting editor now and a freelance journalist based in Nairobi. Yes, the temperatures are rising. We hardly about 50 days away from the crucial election, and every other team preparing themselves for one of the most competitive elections in the history of this country. The opposition and government preparing their teams, and it's going to be very competitive from the presidential level to the senatorial level, the National Assembly level, the county level where we have governors and also members of the county assembly. One of the fiercest election battles that this country has seen in recent times. And I think to answer your question, whether we have a level playing field, I have two answers, yes and no. Yes, because Kenya enjoys very good democratic, free and fair space where people can openly express their views about their political inclinations and about the candidates they want to support in the election. But no, because we are seeing signs of dictatorial tendencies and games which are being played by the umpire, which is the IEBC, the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission, which will run this election. We still have several queries that is being put before this commission. One, we have a very new commission that is less experienced, and going by what Justice Johan Quigler recommended immediately after electoral violence in 2007, 2008. They have not been in office for more than 6 months. They are fairly rookies. No known commissioner, not a single one, has had electoral experience worth holding a general election of this magnitude. So to that extent, we have fears that these rookies may not administer a free and fair election. We have seen them listen to partisan interests even in the acquisition of ballot papers, even in terms of how they have responded to queries being raised by opposition and claims being made by government itself. We can see there's a lot of inexperience in terms of the CVs and individual commissioners who are sitting pretty in that office now. So yes and no, the level playing field may be there, but there are so many fears. We have not seen them take action with hate speech, which is rising. We have not seen them take action with the botched primaries, which really have an impact on the general election itself. And we're waiting to see what kind of leaders will they provide for this country in the election that they will be the arbiter.
Now, David, in the past, Kenyan elections have really been very much about the messengers as opposed to the message. Now, when you look at what is going on now and listening to politicians and the ordinary folks, what are some of the most important issues that are being talked about now?
I think the biggest issue confronting our nation today is price of food, and particularly staple food, and which is why I agree with Heidi, who alluded to the Unga revolution. Kenyans eat unga or maize meal or maize flour every single day in their lives. So in the absence of that unga in the shelves and in the supermarket and in the absence of that particular meal on the tables of 40 million Kenyans, it is a disaster that has never been witnessed in the history of this country. And for a government that is in place that cannot provide food for its people, it's almost impossible to assume that they have done anything. The price of maize meal today is beyond affordability of any Kenyan who earns anything like $10 a day. It is too expensive, even for an upper middle class individual like myself. It's not even available on the shelves. So we have a country that cannot even plan to have food available, even if people had money. That is the worst we have ever seen in the history of this country.
You talk about unga.
So
what
we
about
have other issues? Yes.
What about sukuma wiki?
Sukuma wiki is there, but you need a lot of touch to do it with sukuma wiki to be able to have energy to do your manual labor. So this touch is what is missing on the shelves, and we have a government led by two gentlemen who do not know where to source maize at affordable prices to serve or feed the mouths of Kenyans.
What about the launching of the standard gauge railway? To what extent is that being received by the ordinary voter in Kenya?
If the standard gauge railway cannot supply maize to the mouths which are hungry, if the standard gauge railway cannot reduce the cost of living for the average Kenyan, if the standard gauge railway cannot avail medicines in hospitals, if the standard gauge railway cannot avail money to pay nurses to return to work to serve Kenyans who are ill, then it is good for nothing. It should just be packed and be sent back to the donors or the people that donated it. It has had limited impact, perhaps served a little quarter of the elites that are in this country who are importing big things, and they are countable, less than 5% of the national population. No, very few people have felt the impact of that. Yes, a brilliant infrastructural project that would have changed the economy, but the pricing of it, the cartels and corruption associated with it, the buying of land at treble the cost of the market, only tells you that we are witnessing another cycle of corruption that has never been witnessed in this country. It has benefited profiteers who are corruptly dealing in terms of supply of land, in terms of compensation of land, in terms of acquiring of what are called archaic wagons and engine trains, diesel trains. Our competitors in Ethiopia and Tanzania have used, I think, a third of the money we used. It has not impacted this economy in a positive way that anybody who has a sense in his head or her head can talk about.
David, what about the drought? Is it being perceived as man-made, or is it being perceived as perhaps the result of climate change?
Partly because of climate change, which is affecting every other nation globally, but secondly because of poor governance and a government that has no foresight, that can plan for its people. We have these climate experts and weather persons who tell us it will hit us from this date until this date. You need to put in place contingency measures. You need to put in place livestock off-take measures so that you cushion farmers and pastoralists against the losses they will make, so that you cushion people from walking long distances to access water for drinking and for making their food and keeping their livestock. But if you have a government that can hardly plan, that has foresight, then it ends up in another crisis like what we have witnessed, people losing their only source of livelihood, their animals, people losing their lives, people surviving without water, and people who are therefore left at the mercy of relief agencies, which in itself do not even arrive on time. So, yes, we have the climate change challenge, but we need to put in place contingency measures, a sharp government that has intelligence on what goes on the ground, so that we do not lose a single person because they were cut off by roads or by drought and could not then access food and essential supplies or get to hospital on time.
Thank you very much, David Ohito, for your insight.
Okay, welcome.
Well, before we pause for a short break, a reminder that Straight Talk Africa is now streaming on Facebook. Just enter the keyword Straight Talk Africa and watch our show live, and don't forget to share it with your friends. Also, we are on Twitter, and we are tweeting live. Follow us at VOA Shaka. That's VOA Shaka, and join in on today's discussion with your questions and comments. Don't forget to use the hashtag VOA Kenya Election Preview. We'll put some of your tweets on air later in the show. We'll be right back with you, so please don't go away.
We are able to touch on things that are important to people on an everyday basis. We hope that our viewers are getting inspired when they watch our show. They're getting a view of the world from a different perspective, things that perhaps are not in their immediate vicinity. Today, I could put in on the show something that is a little different, a little unique, and this gives me that inspiration to come to work.
Today's youth are not just the next generation of African leaders, they are today's leaders. And this is the time to invest in them. Today, not tomorrow. So let's connect. Let's engage with each other on issues that will transform our societies. Innovation, leadership, entrepreneurship, things that you're doing to move the continent forward, to make you the greatest generation that Africa has known. It's Upfront every Wednesday, 17:30 UTC, right here on The Voice of America.
Joining us here in our Washington studio are two distinguished guests. Ali Badawe, a North America spokesperson for NASA, a major opposition political party in Kenya, and Jeremiah Mbui, a former parliamentary candidate, Meru District, and supporter of the Kenyan ruling Jubilee Party. Last but not least, Dr. Rosalind K. Akombe, a commissioner of the Kenyan Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission. She joins us from the VOA studios at the United Nations, where, ladies and gentlemen, I have to say frankly that I'm profoundly honored and exceedingly humbled to be able to host the three of you on Straight Talk Africa for the first time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
You're most welcome. Let me come to you, Ali, immediately. You also happen to be on my immediate right anyway. You listened to David.
Yes.
Do you agree with some of the very, very strong charges he seems to be laying on the government?
Yes, I agree with David, and David is a very respected journalist. And I do agree with most of his points, regarding unga, food in Kenya, regarding, the processes that we have that are running our elections. And what I can say is that the Jubilee government was not prepared to govern.
Why?
In 2013. They were not prepared. And this is based on what we've seen in the last 4 years. They were simply not prepared. They had these elaborate plans. If you go on social media, you'll find these plans of high-speed trains and stadiums, across the counties. And these things are still living on social media. They made these large promises, but they were not prepared to govern. When they got in, they realized that, those promises that they gave were nowhere close to what they could be able to do.
But, but in fairness to them, they have delivered the essentially standard gauge railway, which I think is really a huge.
Well, you will remember the standard gauge railway was under the plan of Vision 2030 under the coalition government of hopefully the next president, Raila Odinga,
yes,
and Mwai Kibaki. It was a project under the coalition government.
But they delivered.
Well, the train left Nairobi and it went to Mombasa. So we can say it started working. But delivered, I'm not sure.
What about the jobs that come with the project, for example?
Of course, there are jobs that come with the project. But what I'm saying is that, first of all, like David Ohito mentioned, they spent more than 3 times that was supposed to be spent. We know how much was spent in Ethiopia and other neighboring countries.
And Tanzania?
Yeah, and we know that there was a lot of money that was spent. There was a lot of corruption involved.
And those are, in fact, I think, run on electricity, correct? Yours is diesel.
Ours is diesel. And then you'll also realize that the Chinese were given almost all the contracts on everything. There were some funny pictures that were going around showing the translations in Kiswahili that the Chinese had made. They first of all had wrong. These are signs in the railway station. They first of all had the wrong wording in English. And then the Kiswahili translation, it was nothing but comical. And we're in a country where we have a lot of able Swahili speakers. They decided to give it to the Chinese. They were not prepared for the launch. You know, we're appreciative. You know, we needed rail transport between Nairobi and Mombasa in a timely fashion, but they were not prepared to launch it. But they set it up in such a way that they were going to launch it right before the election, conveniently before the election, you know, to try and get some brownie points, because they're suffering right now. You know, all the votes they think that were in their bag are really not there. So they're desperate and they're looking for any way to get extra votes in the bag.
That may be politics, but you actually can't blame it, frankly, on the incumbent government in Kenya, because that can be done anywhere where there is politics. What about the fact that it cuts the distance, for example, in terms of Mombasa, Nairobi, pretty much by half?
That's very inaccurate when you say by half, because if you've traveled between Nairobi to Mombasa under the old system,
on the Lunatic Express, you would board the train in the city center in Nairobi, in that area that was called railway station, and then you would go on to Mombasa, into the CBD of Mombasa. But under this new station, the first station is in Syokimau, you know, which is a distance from Nairobi, so you have to pay some money and you have to spend extra time to get there. And then when you get to Miritini in Mombasa, lo and behold, there's not even any transport that has been organized to orderly get people out of that station to Mombasa town and other places that people want to go. So indeed, it is taking a shorter time, but the distance of the rail in itself has been cut. I cannot speak about the technical reasons why the rail could not start in CBD Nairobi and why it could not go to the old train station in Mombasa. But the distance, you know, the time has been reduced, but the amount it takes, the amount of time it takes to get from home to the railway station and from your destination to the other destination where you're going has significantly increased. Jeremiah, from all I have heard, it looks like a very difficult case for you perhaps to make as to why, in fact, the incumbent government led by Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta should be re-elected. Make the case.
Thank you, Saka, for hosting us. I'll respond to issues that he has raised, especially the SGR, which is one of the many promises that this government made and has fulfilled. This government came to power when the country was unveiling a new constitutional order. There was devolution going on. They made promises, and in fact, the platform on which they are running for re-election is delivery of promises that they made. The devolution has worked out. The counties are functional. Almost 40% of resources gathered at the national level and dispersed all over the country.
But what about some who are actually very critical, frankly, of the government, that it has pretty much not delivered, frankly, in as far as devolution is concerned?
Well, the law actually requires them to devolve only 15% of previous year's audited revenue. The government has devolved over 30% already. So they have gone even beyond the constitutional requirement. The government has delivered Huduma functions.
What does that mean?
Those are devolved services, social services, through Huduma centers all over the country. So now citizens can be able to get government services quickly and closer to wherever they live.
The government has delivered on SGR. The government has delivered on insurance coverage, NHIF, so that now more and more people are able to get insurance coverage. The government has delivered free maternal care for mothers who are getting new babies and stuff like that. So to a large extent, our platform for re-election is actually delivery of promises that we made. Yes, there are a few things like the stadium he's talking about that have not been delivered, but some of these functions are being taken over by county governments. The county governments all over, they are refurbishing the stadiums and many of the functions in agriculture, many of the things that Ohito and him are blaming the government actually should be the function of the county governments, not the national government. You know, so to a large extent, this government has delivered. That is why opinion polls show the president leading the opposition by more than 15 points.
Even though he probably doesn't seem ready to have made much improvement from probably where he was standing about 4 or 5 years ago. Let me ask you a question.
Yes.
There are people obviously who say devolution is a very good thing. There's no question about it.
Yes.
And as you say, there are some good things that have occurred in the last 4 years. But what about some who also say that perhaps one of the single most important accomplishments the Kenyatta administration has actually done is the proliferation of, in their words, not mine, corruption?
Very good question. But I would not say corruption is a social problem that permeates across the Kenyan society in general. I happen to go to a land office where people don't even wait to be asked for bribe. People come prepared to offer bribe.
Really?
It has become so pervasive, it has become almost a cultural problem in the country. So to a large extent...
Kitu
kidogo, even when no one is asking for it. I was buying a piece of land in a little town called Maua, and these guys are willing to do the work, but I find old mamas and wazees just offering bribes even without solicitation.
So corruption actually, one might say, has actually been institutionalized.
It has been institutionalized, it has been accepted, even in church.
Well, let me go to Rosalind in New York. Rosalind, are you there?
Yes, I am, Shaka.
I'm sure that you had reporter or editor David from Nairobi pretty much being critical of your institution.
Yeah, thanks again, Shaka, for having me here. I'd really wish to invite David to look through the CVs, the resumes, the curriculum vitae of all the 7 commissioners before he makes the conclusion he is making. As you can see, I'm streaming in from the United Nations offices where I spent many years working, and many years working in various parts of the world on elections. So if you look at the collective experience that we have as commissioners, the 7 of us, there is enough there. But beyond looking at the commissioners, the IEBC is an institution. It is an institution that should stand beyond the 7 commissioners. And we are proud of the work of our staff in the various constituencies. We have 290 staff in each constituency. We have 47 staff in each of the counties who are doing an extremely important job, who have run elections in the country, who know what it is to run elections. What they needed is leadership and inspiration, and that is what the commissioners are providing under the leadership of Chairman Wafula Chebukati. But in terms of experience, in terms of knowing what it is to run elections, I mean, you know, we Kenyans sometimes shortchange ourselves. We are one of the many African countries, and many other countries actually in general, pick the lessons, the good lessons of how to manage elections from our country. But we don't give ourselves enough credit in terms of our ability to be able to manage an institution like the IEBC. You know, but having said that, I mean, it is, you know, we are seeing this rhetoric continuing, you know, now for the last few weeks. And you know, having served in other countries, I know exactly what it is. You know, when you know, this is a common trend where you'll see that political actors will at times beat up the messenger, beat up the election management body, so that they can be able to show that in the end, the whole, it's to question the credibility of the elections. It's to set themselves up not to accept the results that will come out of it. That is absolutely normal. We have seen it in several countries. It's not acceptable, but it is not a reflection of where the IEBC is. It's more a reflection of the political rhetoric in the country, in which the political actors, both sides, or maybe the 8 candidates, presidential candidates that will have, will wish to do that, so that in the end, they can be able to say we ran a good campaign. It's just that the arbiter did not, moderate this well. If they had moderated well, we would have won this election. And it's a dangerous way. It's a dangerous rhetoric to keep moving, pushing forward, because it puts our country in a situation whereby people will not, they're setting themselves up not to accept results of the elections. And I don't think that is the best way to proceed.
We know, for example, that you are the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission. But really, Rosalie, if you were to talk to us from the deepest, better part of the bottom of your Kenyan heart and soul, how independent is the IEBC? Because there are some people who actually say that you are not really independent, that you are subordinate to the chief executive.
Shaka, we are absolutely independent. We have shown that we are able to make our decisions without being influenced by anybody. If you watched how we carried out the nomination process, the registration of the presidential candidates, you would have seen our independence come out very clearly. We treated all the 8 aspirants at that point as aspirants. All of them sat on the same chair. We did not, for us, it was not, we didn't have a candidate who was a president and a candidate who was not a president. For us, all those were presidential candidates, presidential aspirants, whom we then authorized to become presidential candidates, having submitted our documents to us. I think you have seen the decisions that we have made on the ballot papers, for instance. Those are independent decisions of the Commission. We do not, we do not wait for any political actor to give us direction. We abide strongly to Article 249 of the Constitution that says that the IEBC and other independent commissions are only answerable to the Constitution and to the people of Kenya.
Well, of course, later I'll ask you about the issue regarding printing of the ballot papers in Dubai. But right now, you're tuned into Straight Talk Africa. We'll have more of a discussion in a moment, including our social media segment. So please, don't go away.
Like Voice of America on Facebook. Follow VOA on Twitter. Join VOA on our YouTube channel. Like, follow, join VOA.
Whether you live in Somalia, Senegal, Nigeria, or Zimbabwe, from every corner of sub-Saharan Africa, turn to us for information and experts to help you improve health and life, for you and your family, for your health. Africa Health Network, only on VOA.
Welcome back to Straight Talk Africa, live from Washington. It's time to bring in my colleague and social media reporter, Ayen Biyor. Take it away, Ayen.
Well, thanks, Shaka. Kenya's upcoming presidential elections are slated for August 8th, 2017. The race between incumbent Uhuru Kenyatta and Raila Odinga, the main opposition candidate, is looking increasingly competitive. Well, this leads us to our question of the week, which asks, what do you think about the incumbent president Uhuru Kenyatta and Raila Odinga, the main opposition candidate? Well, before we begin, I'd like to thank our audience for using our social media platforms to communicate with us. And another reminder that we are tweeting live today. Just use the hashtag VOA Kenya Election Preview. And if you haven't yet, please follow us at VOA Shaka. And speaking of it, let's go to a tweet from Hagai W. Lema, who tweets, everyone wants the best for Kenyans, so it's about who is good at convincing the race is on. Well, it certainly is on. And we have another tweet from Katabara Ronald, who tweets, African leaders are all the same. They all engage in extroversion. Very interesting. Now to our comment of the week from Facebook fan Greens Kansime from Uganda, who writes, Kenya's National Super Alliance Party, under the leadership of Raila Odinga, can turn the nation toward a more desirable direction. President Uhuru Kenyatta has failed to fulfill his pledge as stipulated in his manifesto. The Jubilee Party government has been involved in several corruption scandals, and the economy has collapsed. Any instigated violence by either side during the upcoming election should be condemned in the strongest terms possible. Very interesting. Well, let's go to another comment from Facebook fan Tina Tatina from Kigali, Rwanda, who writes, instigating preposterous investigations against an opponent with a robust political record has been a tool used by incumbents to puncture the credibility of their opponent. This method is being replicated against Raila Odinga. Very interesting. And our last Facebook comment comes from Prince Herbert Warigara Jr., who writes, incumbents have a high opportunity to win elections they organize because they predetermine who will win the race. Therefore, Raila Odinga may win the polls, but the power of incumbency by Uhuru Kenyatta will deny Odinga the win. Very interesting. Well, thank you, everyone, for that round of discussion. And a reminder that we appreciate all of the audience feedback, so please keep them coming. And if you're a new fan, drop us a line at africatv@voanews.com. Once again, our email address is africatv@voanews.com. Or you can post your comment on our Facebook page. Just enter the keywords Straight Talk Africa. Interact with our show as it's streaming live. And be sure to visit us online at voaafrica.com, or you can join our YouTube channel. Sign up to VOA TV2 Africa and follow us on Twitter at VOA Shaka. A reminder that the show is streaming live every Wednesday. Go to VOA Straight Talk Africa TV program page on our website, or you can simply watch us live on your mobile device. Just download the VOA mobile app. Now let's take a look at what's on tap for next week's program. On the next, Straight Talk Africa, a conversation with the Voice of America director, Amanda Bennett, on her recent trip to Africa and VOA's Africa initiatives, including meeting with African government officials, affiliate executives, media members, journalism students, and the African youth. VOA at work in Africa, on the next Straight Talk Africa. Well, that's our social media segment for today. Shaka, you and the guest have a lot of social media comments to discuss. Back to you.
Thanks again for sharing with us some social media reaction. And welcome back. And today we are discussing the upcoming Kenyan presidential election. Our distinguished guests are Ali Badawi, Jeremiah Mbui, and Dr. Rosalind K. Akombe, who joins us from the United Nations in New York. Once again, of course, lady and gentlemen, I am profoundly honored and exceedingly humbled to have the opportunity to host you again on Straight Talk Africa.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're most welcome. Now, Ali, you've had, of course, some, social media reaction, and you had, of course, the previous panelists. Your reaction?
Okay. From the social media reaction, you can tell people from as far as Rwanda, they do realize that Raila Odinga is a statesman. And the incumbent is trying to use, some tactics that incumbents use to keep him away.
But you know that people may, of course, in fact, are right to be entitled to their different opinions, but not necessarily their different sets of facts.
I mean, again, I agree with you, but the bigger picture is that with the free flow of information that has happened in the last so many years, it's now easy for people to go and verify information and check, whenever there's statements issued by the government on the opposition leader, people can easily go check. So at least that will not be a very big issue this coming election, because in the last election, to some extent, it did play a part, some false stories going around, and, and there was the big elephant in the room, the ICC, which are not there this time. But going back to what Jeremiah was talking about previously, he talked about promises being delivered, and he mentioned the SGR. And you will remember very well, the promise that was made was electric trains. We saw the pictures. You know, they had this very special flyer called the Uchumi Transport, where all the pictures of Uhuru Kenyatta, William Ruto, and all the top level people in Jubilee were there. That's what they promised.
Yes.
They gave us a diesel train.
Right.
You know, we never saw anything that we saw with what we've actually seen as what has been delivered.
But in fairness to them, they have argued that given the complicated terrain, it probably would have cost simply too much.
They already spent 3 times more what Ethiopia spent for a longer line, a train that's electric. So, I mean, I'm not an engineer myself, but again, that's just a talking point that we're bringing in. And then you also talked about devolution, you know, and it's very clear which side is devolution and which side is anti-devolution. You know, devolution was mandated by the 2010 Constitution. And Jeremiah very well, you know, threw in some numbers, 15, 30%.
30%.
Yeah,
True.
the number that was mandated by the Constitution is very true. 15%.
Yes.
But what he failed to say is that 15% was a base minimum, but money had to follow function. And that's a part that was skipped. So meaning 15% is minimum, but if the functions get to 40%, then the Constitution mandates 40%. And in the NASA campaign, devolution is a big deal. You know, Mr. Mashinani himself, the Bomet governor, Isaac Ruto, is in our team, who's been pushing for money to go to the grassroots, to Mashinani.
The man who presides over beautiful Kericho tea.
Yes, Bomet, in Bomet County. And he's been the one who's been fighting for money to go down to the county governments. And we've seen the changes, you know. There's been a bit of challenges, you know, with devolution, but we've seen the changes in counties like Wajir, Garissa, places that had no chance under the previous administration. But this government, with their tyranny of numbers, they made sure that the money that went to the county was minimal. And there was the Commission for Revenue Allocation under Cheshire. They did a very good job in coming up with a formula for the distribution of funds across the counties. But the fatal mistake they made, the fatal error that they made, was they did not include some recurrent expenditures within the monies that they were supposed to be distributing. Recurrent expenditures are salaries, you know, so they assumed that the salaries will be paid by the national government, the same way the national government pays governors and MCAs. But the national government refused, and you had this tussle where the money that the counties received was not enough. So they were forced to, from the budgets that they were given, they were forced to pull out money there for current expenditures, including salaries for health workers and other salaries that the CRA had not budgeted for. They depended on the good faith of the Jubilee government, and we definitely know what happened after that. And then, of course, with the free maternal you know, care, we have places like Lamu where you have NGOs that are working to deliver services because of what government has failed to do. You know, there's NGOs like Safari Doctors, and there's so many other NGOs working there on a gap that the government has failed to fulfill. And the monies that go to Kenya from the diaspora, the remittances, a lot of them are going towards healthcare. We are the ones who send, I'm sure Jeremiah sends a lot of money back home. A lot of this money is going to education, healthcare, things that the national government is supposed to be doing. But unfortunately, they've had 4 years and they've failed.
You see, Ali, you are in a very good position, obviously, because you happen to be in the opposition party. And there are
coalition.
Well, it's a coalition.
We are coalition. We have so many political parties, yes.
There are people who will obviously say that, you see, you have every reason to criticize the government in power. But what about if, in fact, you were in power? What would you have done differently?
What I would have done differently, for starters, is devolution. We were graced by a new constitution, one of the most progressive constitutions in the world. I would have supported all organs that were mandated to implement this constitution. There was a back and forth between the national government. They were trying to stick to the old provincial system, and this is part of the problem that was created between the governments and the county. That's the first thing that they should have done. When it comes to security, they should have consulted with the counties. There's been issues with insecurity from 2013, starting with the Westgate attacks and Mpeketoni and a lot of other terrorist attacks that we've seen, where we have officers in Nairobi who are giving command to people who are on ground in Lamu. So people have to wait, and you know, in security matters, tactically sometimes some decisions have to be made on the ground. And that's the reason why in some of these unfortunate incidents where we have terrorist attacks, we have a lot of lives lost, not necessarily because the terrorists were very sophisticated, but because they're taking advantage of these gaps that we have in our security system.
Final question. We realize that, at least as Jeremiah said, that corruption appears to in fact have become institutionalized. What would you have done differently to stop corruption?
What I would have done differently, first of all, is there's a body that's mandated with handling corruption issues, the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission. And what I would have done different is, as president, I would have mandated the different units in government.
Do they have teeth that bite?
They have teeth, but the teeth don't really bite. And I also think they also are operating under the old system. We do have new hardware, but they're still operating under the old software.
Despite the new constitution ushered in 2010?
Despite the new constitution, because the mentality has to be changed. The one thing that I would have done different as president is mandate the units under my control to take responsibility for corruption, because the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, they don't have the technical know-how of what happens in every government unit. We've seen them comically sometimes cut out some files and computers, and they really don't know what they're looking for.
Jeremiah, your reaction?
Thank you, Shaka.
You're most welcome, sir.
Yes. I would like to touch on something Ali said, especially regarding the SGR, about the cost of building the railway in Kenya. One, the terrain in Kenya is different from the other places he cites, but the biggest driver of cost has been land. In the countries he cites, like Tanzania,
I've read about that,
it is easy for the government to just take private property and build infrastructure. But in Kenya, they have to compensate the land owners. So acquisition of the land to erect the railway drove the cost pretty high. Now,
more than Kitu Kidogo?
More than Kitu Kidogo. Kitu Kidogo is politics. And
do you have incontrovertible evidence on that? Not liable to falter.
But what I'll do is the president, this was a flagship project by the president. The president, people may say there is corruption around in government by people around the president, maybe family members and all that. But the president personally is beyond reproach. Former President Daniel Moi said that only Uhuru Kenyatta would go to State House purposely just to check on him, how he is.
And others?
Others who solicit something. After they greet him, they have to be given a little bit of money. But he said, only Uhuru came to check on me purely for purposes of checking how I'm doing.
Maybe someone did something for Uhuru so much that he doesn't need to do that.
Personally, as a human being, and I've interacted with him, I've campaigned with him and all that, he's not a greedy person. He's unlikely to solicit or allow anyone around him to get Kitu Kidogo.
He grew up in the State House.
Absolutely, yes. But others grew in State House and they're still greedy. You know, Moi's children are case in point and others. So
are you suggesting that Moi's children are greedy?
There are cases where they are cited. And I mean,
how about the deputy president?
The point being that this was a flagship project for his government. It was completely above board. There were no issues of corruption. The only issue is cost, and cost was being driven by both the terrain, the nature of the terrain, and the need to acquire land. Now, talking of corruption, and what you asked him what he would do if they were in power. History is a very good predictor of future. Fortunately, their flag bearer was in power during the Kibaki government.
Half a loaf.
Half a loaf. Nusu mkate.
Prime Minister.
Prime Minister.
Without authority.
When he was sitting as Prime Minister, there were allegations of personal corruption on his person, Raila Odinga.
Were they proven?
Yes, money was lost. There was a project under his office called Kazi kwa Vijana, over in the billion, 2-3 billion.
Was he prosecuted?
He was never prosecuted.
And convicted?
He was never, but people around him grew fabulously rich.
Were they convicted?
They were never prosecuted. They were never convicted. And some of these things are hard to convict because one of the hardships in Kenya is the judiciary. IEBC, the anti-corruption body, sorry, not IEBC, the anti-corruption body may investigate, may prefer charges.
How clean is the Kenyan judiciary?
The Kenyan judiciary is not the cleanest. It's not the cleanest. The philosophy, the judicial philosophy is not very clear.
You know, someone once said that in Kenya, if you actually have a case, you don't have to worry about hiring a lawyer.
Right.
Because
by the judge.
You can buy a judge.
Absolutely.
True?
True. So that has made, and now with the independence and the whittling down of the powers of the presidency, someone will be charged with corruption. The file will be taken to the prosecutor, the deputy public prosecutor. They will take the case to court. Then the corrupt person will tie the case up in court for years and years.
What about the reforms, frankly, brought about by the respected former Chief Justice, Dr. Willie Mutunga?
Absolutely. And Mutunga tried. But these forces fight back. And then again, you got to give the judges the space to actually make their rulings. If the judge is receiving kitu kidogo on the side, Mutunga cannot do much. Corruption in Kenya is a social
institutionalized,
problem.
As you say.
Institutionalized.
Just like people say racism is institutionalized in the United States.
Absolutely. I have been to church, Shaka, where the deacon, wearing the big robes, they were having a fundraiser, and they invited me as a guest of honor. I go, I make my contribution. The deacon says, I need to see you in person in my office. When we go to the office, with these big robes and the big rungus they carry, he tells me, give me something on my own.
Oh, come on.
So it is a problem. Corruption is a problem in our country.
Let's bring in our sister in New York. Rosalind, of course, you've been following the conversation here, haven't you?
Yes, I have. And I was hoping that at some point we'll move to talk a little bit about what we are doing in preparation for the elections. But
as a matter of
fact,
I am coming to you, and there is, at least according to some people, some apparent credibility gap or credibility questions, especially regarding what they call the Arguleya company in Dubai, where you are trying to print the ballot papers. Have you heard about that?
Of course, Shaka. I mean, first to commend actually the two gentlemen for the very interesting discussions they've been having, and hoping that this is a kind of discourse that you're going to see during our campaigns and not political rhetoric that divides the Kenyans, that people will have an opportunity to campaign around the sort of issues that we've been hearing the two gentlemen, Jeremiah and Ali, speak about. On the issue of the ballot papers, we've been having discussions. We have consulted very broadly with various political actors. We had a meeting with both the leadership of NASA and the leadership of Jubilee on the 24th of May. We indicated to them where we were in the process. We sought their support in moving forward with a direct procurement or direct purchase of the ballot papers. They agreed in principle on the issue of picking one company and going with it. Of course, there are different views on which company that was going to be. And we had very professional work done, considered different companies. For us, the big thing was to ensure that we had a company that had the capacity to be able to print 120 ballot papers and deliver those ballot papers to the country designated per polling station, per constituency on time. And the company that we had, based on all the professional opinions that we had received, was the Algureya company, which has done a fantastic job in Kenya before, including providing ballot papers for over 20 by-elections that the country has had. And so we moved forward with that. We want to ensure that we have all the political actors with us as we do this, and that is why the Commission, under the leadership of Chairman Chebukati, has invited the religious community, the media, we have civil society, we have the Kenya Bureau of Standards, and all the 8 presidential candidates to provide representatives to accompany us to Dubai to oversee the entire process of production, packaging, and shipping of the ballot papers, so that in case people have any concerns, they are addressed at that point. You know, Shaka, we are only one security feature away in terms of developing our ballot papers. Only one security feature away for it to be the same, have the same security features as the currency in Kenya. Our ballot papers have security, 7 security features. We have serialization of the ballot papers. We are doing everything we can to ensure that the Kenyans have confidence in the process. They have confidence that the ballot papers they're going to be using for purposes of elections have gone through all the security measures, and that we avert any concerns that people might have of any ballot stuffing, which could not even happen if you look at the procedures we have in place.
I hope that you are aware of the fact that that particular company you're talking about actually became an elephant in the room as far as Zambia is concerned. I hope you're aware of that.
We are absolutely aware of the case of Zambia, and we are aware of the case in Zambia, and we are aware of other companies that have been involved, you know, we have seen accusations leveled against them that have come to pass. I mean, and that's why what we have done is to ensure that we put in place all the measures. I mean, and again, going back to your example of Zambia, you know, the process also ended up being appreciated by all the parties afterwards. And they realized that there was no foul play that was in place. So, you know, regardless of what company you are going to pick in Kenya, you are going to find yourself in this situation. And so for me, and for us as a commission, the important thing was to ensure that you have the security measures in place, but that you also have a monitoring process, a stakeholder involvement in that monitoring process while you're doing the printing, packaging, and shipping of the ballot papers.
Well, I wish I could ask you this question, but time happens not to be our best ally. Let me put it to you, Ali. If you go back in history, you probably have actually had a free, fair, and credible election once since 1992. And we're talking about 2002 and Samuel Kivuitu. We're talking about 2005 referendum and 2010 referendum. Okay. Since then, you've not had really an election that is respected by Kenyans.
Okay. All right. Now, I will start with 2002. And in 2002, you know...
less than a minute.
Yes, when Kibaki won, there was 2 establishment candidates. I mean, Uhuru Kenyatta was on the ballot, but he was basically Moi's project. And the other 2 elections were referendums, so there was not so much at stake. Right. And in the 2002 election, you know, the support was overwhelming, so there was really no ways of stealing. And,
in 2007, people say that the result, in fact, that was, you know, used to decide who won did not reflect the will of the people.
It did not reflect the will of the people. It's very true. And any independent observer will tell you that Raila won the 2007 election. And you will remember that it was one of the issues that we've been fighting IEBC.
Unfortunately, time happens not to be our best ally. Okay. On that note, thanks to our distinguished guests, Ali Badawe, Jeremiah Mbui, Dr. Rosalind K. Akombe, and David Ohito, who joined us earlier from Nairobi. Thanks to our affiliate stations, along with our viewers and listeners, we thank you for tuning in. For many of our Voice of America radio affiliates, Learning English is coming up next. And tomorrow morning, it's Daybreak Africa with James Bate. On behalf of the Voice of America, thanks for tuning into Straight Talk Africa. In the meantime, get better, not bitter, Kenya. And please remember to keep the African hopes alive.